All right, by now you have probably gone through your hard drives and collected media that you would like to bring into your first project. And I've done the same. I've kind of gone through and picked a number of shots that we used in this project and sorted them out into the appropriate folders. And actually, in preparation for this particular tutorial, I have actually gone back and picked up the original edit so that we can use it as a reference, and we'll kind of bounce back and forth between the original edit and another sequence where we're actually recreating the edit again for the purposes of this tutorial. Now, one of the goals here of doing this little sample edit is to be able to quickly show new editors how easy it is to edit with Edius. And we're going to show you one way to do editing, and then after our little series is over, we will demonstrate other approaches to video editing. We'll spend more time on each of the windows. For example, we'll do a whole tutorial just on the timeline window as kind of a reference. We'll do a tutorial on the preview window so that at any time, if anybody wants to gain more information about a particular aspect of the program, they'll have that as a reference tutorial. But for this little series, we're going to quickly go through one way to edit with Edius. And in this particular style of editing, I would like for you to take a moment and make sure that your settings are identical to mine on the timeline. And so if you'll just take a moment and go up here and make sure that you are in the insert mode of editing, and that is demonstrated by the little orange down arrow in the icon there, and that your ripple mode is set off, and that is demonstrated by the fact that it's not blue. If yours is blue, your ripple mode is on, and for the purposes of this tutorial series, we're going to have you shut that off. Just a brief introduction to some of the features of our timeline before we get started, and this might be easier to demonstrate if we actually go back to our edit here, our finished edit, and notice up here there's a little slider bar that as we move this across, we can expand out our timeline to be able to see it larger on our screen. So if we need to work in fine detail on any given clip, we can have it expanded out like that. Or if we want to see the bigger picture at any time, we can collapse the timeline to be able to see more clips at the same time. And you can see the time frame reference here expanding and contracting at the same time, showing you how many seconds you are able to view at once there. Now, to make it easier for me, I have assigned keyboard shortcuts to this operation, and you can do the same if you're interested to know how to assign keyboard shortcuts. There's a free tutorial there over at ediustips.com under free tutorials on Edius 7. And if you scroll down there, there's one on customizing your keyboard shortcuts. And in that video, I show you how you can assign new keyboard shortcuts. And in particular, I show you how I have set up the plus and minus keys on my keyboard so that if I want to expand out my timeline, I just hit the plus key several times and it opens it up, and if I want to contract it, I just use the minus key. And that really does speed up the editing. It's worth taking the time to assign keyboard shortcuts for that operation. Okay, now you'll see that the timeline is divided into two. The upper two tracks here are video tracks or graphic tracks. You could put titles up here as well. And then below this middle line here is all audio tracks. And if we've got our tracks opened up wide like this to be able to work with audio, for example, we might not be able to see all the audio tracks at once. There's a little slider bar over here where we can move up and down, or we can change the size of our audio tracks so that we can see more on the screen at once. We can also adjust how much real estate we assign to the timeline. So if your current task is intensively editing with the timeline, you might want to make that larger so that it gives you more room to work with the various audio and video tracks. Now, something that I will often do when I'm starting a brand new edit, I might take the time to rename these tracks just to help keep myself organized a little bit as to what type of audio goes on each track. At least you can do this when you get started on an edit. Usually what happens is halfway through the edit, you kind of lose track of that and you're madly piecing things together and things don't end up on the right tracks. But at least we can start out to try and be organized. You can rename a track just by right-clicking on any one of the audio tracks. And you'll see that as you do that, you actually have a number of options here. We could add extra audio tracks. We could duplicate, we could move tracks around, we could delete tracks. But what we want to do here is rename our track. And let's call this maybe ambient audio. And that simply refers to the natural audio that comes with each clip. The next track we might rename to be narration. The next track we might call music track. And we'll just leave the extra track for other options that we may need. One other thing about audio, or maybe I'll just show you a couple more things about audio real quick, is that you can assign the type of audio that's going to go to each track. Just click or right click over here in this side panel to the audio track, and you can choose what type of audio you want to assign to any given track. Now the way we have assigned it here, you'll see that audio is going to be divided between two tracks. And so for example, if we put down some stereo music right now, it's going to fall between two tracks. Let's just go up to our bin and grab a piece of music here. And we'll see that our audio, the right track, is now going to the first audio track, and the left track is going over to the second track. Well, that's not a good way, really, I believe, to deal with audio music. I don't want them on two separate tracks. So what I prefer to do when I'm laying down audio tracks, in most cases, is to change this. And you'll see now that A1 and 2 is going to go to one track. Let's delete that and bring our audio down again, and we'll see that now one piece of audio is going to one track in a stereo music track. Okay, so if your audio is having to jump to two tracks, that's probably the reason right there. Is just check this little side panel and choose the type of audio that you want to use there. All right, the other thing we might point out here about the audio tracks is that by default it comes where you're not able to change the volume levels or the pan. You can kind of see them grayed out here. But if you just click on this once, you will see that you're now able to work with volume. You'll see the little orange line appear in your waveform, and you can point. Let's maybe expand out our audio track, make it larger. Just kind of take your mouse and point to the top area here in between the video and audio, and just kind of with your left mouse button held down, just kind of drag it forward, and that will expand out your audio track, and that'll make it a little easier to see. And now by just taking your mouse and pointing to any point on that orange line, you can create what's called a node, and then be able to adjust the audio levels by dragging down that node. We can place another one here, and drag it back up, so we can adjust the audio volumes that way. And if we want to adjust the pan of the audio from going from left speaker to right speaker, we can also just click that one more time, and you'll see a blue line appear in the middle of your track. And again, you can either by placing nodes down, make adjustments, moving it from left to right, or if you at any point, either with the pan mode on or the volume mode on, if you hold your Alt key down before you point to your orange line and drag it down, with the Alt key held down, you're going to drag the whole line down at once, not just the point from the node that you have placed. So that's a good trick to keep in mind. If you want to move the whole track down at once, then hit your Alt key and hold it down on your keyboard before you point to your line and drag it up or down. All right, you can also mute your audio. Say you're working with maybe a couple of languages and you want to hear the French but not the English. you can mute your English track, so all you're working with and hearing is your French track. And you can also lock a track so that no edits can happen to it. Let's unmute it. And now, even if we try and move that track up and down, we can't make any changes to it. And that's good to know if you want to make sure that you're not accidentally making edits or bumping one particular audio track while you're working on other things. Okay, let's go back to unlock. And with that little brief introduction to the timeline, we're ready to move on and start learning how to edit. However, down the road, we will create a longer tutorial on just the timeline itself. If you're wanting to learn more about the features and functions of your timeline, we will have that reference video a little bit down the road. And if you're anxious to get started and taking a look at that, I believe that we created one for version 7 of Edius that would be very similar. The icons might look a little bit different in version 7, but basically everything else, I believe, is pretty much the same. Okay, so maybe to get an idea of what we're going to try and do, let's go back to our edit here, our completed edit, and take a look at what we have happening here. What we've got is a piece of audio, a piece of music down here in our first line of audio track, and we've got some graphics, kind of a graphical opener showing up on our video track. And let's just play a little bit of this. Now, this particular opener was done in a program, Adobe program called After Effects. This is not something that we did in Edius, and we'll maybe talk more about some of the things that you can do in After Effects and provide more materials on how to work with After Effects to create some nice openers like this in a tutorial down the road. But for now, just to know that this is not done in Edius, that is an After Effects. Okay, so let's get started on how to start piecing this together. You'll notice a little clip here right at the very beginning that's really just a piece of black video. And maybe that's the first thing that we'll show you how to make. Let's get rid of this audio track. Is a color matte. You can do that over here in your bin window. Just go up to this little new clip icon. And first of all, let's open up our graphics bin here, our graphics folder, I should say, inside of our bin. Let's click on that. We'll see that we've already got a color matte here, but just to show you how we create these, it's this little icon up here, new clip, and just click on that and choose. You've got options there to choose color bars. If you want to create SMPTE color bars, you can do that. And what we're interested in is creating a color matte, and by default it is a true broadcast black. And so if you hit OK, then we have now created a color matte, and we could at this point drag this down to our timeline, and we would have pure broadcast black as we start our video. Now, you're not restricted to just creating black mattes. You could go in here and create some of different colors. Just click on any one of these empty black spots, and you can move your cursor around there. And so if you'd like a nice red matte, just choose a nice red color that you like, hit OK, and hit OK again, and now you have a nice red matte that you could have at any point in your edit. Okay, but let's start with our black matte. When I start a new edit, I don't necessarily just start my video at the point 0 on the timeline. I like to leave a little bit of space, kind of breathing room, or kind of a space to try different things out there at the beginning. So I usually go down to about a minute mark in the edit. You can slide with this little bar down here, you can slide your timeline back and forth. You could also use your keyboard shortcut if you've created that to make your timeline smaller so that you can find that minute mark. It's right about there, I would say. Let's open this up. 56 seconds, 58, that's I guess right about there. We're at our first minute mark. So that's where we start with our black. And we can maybe trim this back a little bit. Just point your mouse to the end of it, and then holding your right mouse button down while you slide to the left, you can trim that back to make it any length that you want, either larger or smaller. Okay, let's go after our first piece of graphics here that we created in After Effects. Go back to our bin. Now, there's several ways that you can bring this down to your timeline. One way is to simply double click on the piece of video, and it's going to open up here in our play monitor. And right now it's just showing black, and so it might not think that anything has happened. But if we take our mouse and point to our play monitor cursor here, we can slide this back and forth. We could play it, and using our controls over here, we could stop it, we could roll it back fast, we could play it backwards, we could play it forwards in fast motion. So you can use your controls very much like you would on an old tape player or on a remote control for a tape deck. And the idea of bringing it into your play monitor, now this isn't the best example of this because we're going to use the whole clip. But let's say we were to find another shot here. Once again, one way you can bring it over to your play monitor is just simply double click on the shot, and it then shows up over here in our play monitor. Another way that you can bring your clip into your play monitor is to point to any given clip and drag and drop it into your play monitor, and that's one way to show it up. All right, so the idea of bringing a clip into the play monitor is to allow you to make a good edit decision. You want to scrub through that clip and find a nice clean area of the video where maybe the f-stop isn't being adjusted to make it darker like that. So you want to find maybe 3 or 4 seconds of this piece of video that you can use in your edit. And when you find a start point, you can go down here to one of these icons, click on it, and that will set an in point. And that way you are making an edit decision of where you want to start your clip. And then you can, if your focus is here in the play monitor, you can play this video now by you just hitting the space bar on your keyboard and watch it to look for a good out point. Or you can use point to the kind of the play line cursor there and very quickly look for an out point. Maybe get her before the dentist moves away. And once you're comfortable with your out point, then you can again go over to the icons here. Or if you're more comfortable using keyboard shortcuts, notice that as we point to the icon, it lets you know what keyboard shortcut to use. You can use the O key on your keyboard to set your out point. So it's good to get used to using keyboard shortcuts. It'll speed up your edit. So now you see by this little blue area that's defined that we have created the section of video that we want to use in our edit. Now we could, just by pointing to it and clicking down with our left mouse button, drag this down to our timeline and place it in place. You'll see that the video goes to the video track, the ambient audio goes to the ambient audio track, and we have made our first edit. However, since that is not the clip that we want to start our video with, we'll just delete that. You can just point to it, hit the delete key, and it's gone. And let's go back and get our opener. And since we know that we are going to be using the whole clip, the other way to edit quite quickly, when you start a project especially, is rather than take the time to double click on your source media and bring it into your play monitor and drag it down from there onto the timeline, you can maybe save a step by simply dragging your piece of media right from your bin directly to your timeline. That can save you a little bit of time because, truth be known, you can trim a clip, you can make edit decisions on your clip right on the timeline just as easy or perhaps faster than you can up here in the play window. And so a lot of experienced editors will not necessarily take the time for every clip to bring it into the play window and make their edit decisions there, they'll just simply drag a clip down to the timeline and make their edit decisions and trimming right there. So let's say we only wanted half of this clip. Well, we simply have to go to the end of this clip, click on it, and then drag it back, and then we're only using that much of the clip. All right, but we want to use the whole clip, and let's now go after our music and sync that up. Now you'll see that we've got a blue section here already. That's because Edius is remembering the in and out points that I've already made for this clip. And so we could now simply drag this audio clip into place because the in and out points have already been made. If we were doing this for the very first time, we would probably have to listen to the whole piece of music, or perhaps drag the whole piece of music down into place to be able to work with it better. Unfortunately, Edius, unlike some other programs, we won't mention any names, does not show the waveform of the audio in the play monitor. We really wish that Edius would do that. I don't know, maybe there's some copyright restriction that is not allowing them to do that, but it really is nice to be able to see your waveform showing up in the play monitor so that you could make your edit decisions a lot easier by taking a look at the waveform that's inside the play monitor. But we just have to live with the fact that Edius does not do that, and work around that. If I was working with this for the first time, I might have a separate whole sequence, what I call a scratch sequence. And at any point in time, you can make a new sequence by just going down to this icon here. It says create a new sequence. Click on that. You've created a whole new sequence, and we'll rename this to be Scratch. And now let's change our audio so that it's a stereo track. Let's open this up a little bit so it's much wider. Now we could drag our whole music track to our scratch sequence. We'll see that it, again, because our edit decisions were already made, it's only selecting that little small portion. But if we wanted the whole track, let's just drag it back out. Okay, so this is what the audio track, the music track would look like. Probably the first time that you would use it, you'd end up seeing the whole track if you dragged it down from your bin window to the timeline. And then by listening to it and by examining the waveform, you will be able to make your edit decision down here in your scratch sequence perhaps a little easier than you would from your play monitor, simply because of the fact that you have a visual, a waveform to work with. And while this may not be as important for music track where the waveform is quite uniform all the way across, when you're working with narration, it's really handy to be able to visually look at the waveform as you're making your trims and cuts, as you're piecing together narration. And we'll show you that in a minute, or perhaps in the next tutorial. But for the purposes of this tutorial, let's go back and take a look at our music track here. And let's maybe clear this so that it's looking more like it would if you were working with this piece of music for the very first time and we hadn't made any edit decisions. Now, we mentioned at the beginning of this tutorial that we are going to be showing you one style of editing, and that later, after we'd finished this series, we would demonstrate other ways to edit. The method that I'm going to show you is what's called the drag and drop method. This is kind of maybe what you might call a free-form style of editing, where you're just throwing clips on the timeline, you're editing very fast and furiously. You're not necessarily taking a lot of time making edit decisions here in the play window. You're simply either dragging your media directly from your bins right down into the timeline and taking a look at it that way, or you are dragging it from the play window right down to the timeline. And one of the advantages of the drag and drop method is that you don't necessarily have to tell Edius which track you want your media to go to. In other styles of editing, you would have to take the time to assign a track before you placed your media. So for example, using other methods of editing, if you want music to go to the music track, you would have to take the time to point over here, slide this down to the music track, even maybe point to the music track so that Edius knows for sure that that's where you want the music to go. And then, take the time to point to a place where you want the music to start and set your in points. And then by using either the Insert to Timeline or the Overwrite to Timeline button, click on that, and it's going to then know where to place that video in the proper track. Whereas the drag and drop method, you do not have to take that extra time to assign a certain track. You can simply point to your audio track either from the bin or from your play window, click on it once, and with your left mouse button held down, drag and drop that to the specific track that you want to place that. And since we want this to go to the music track, we'll just point and bring it down to the music track, let our mouse go, and here our music is now in place. And since we know that we want to have this music end in sync with the end of our graphics clip, we can simply go to the end of this, trim it back to that point where the music ends, point to the track, drag it over, and slide that back. Now we might want to have that music fade up just a little bit. Let's expand this out. And the way to do that is to make sure that your audio track is toggled to the volume and it's showing the orange line there. And we can simply now point to the orange line a little ways down the road. And you'll notice that there is kind of an indication of a node there on the very first frame of this video. Point to that, and with your mouse drag that down, and now our audio is going to fade up. All right, let's just check the ending here. Yeah, and that ends fairly nice. You might want to just also fade off the ending a little better. So we could do the same thing at the end. All right. Well, I believe that that gives you a good introduction to making your first edit in Edius.